Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. This presentation is to provide a little bit of background and kind of give a frame of reference for what happened in 1984. This is going to be mostly regarding the history and the politics behind 1984. And we're going to go back pretty far back in history, almost 100 years prior to the attack, to kind of give you an idea of the things that were going on, the major factors that maybe led up to this boiling point that became the attack. So going back to the early 1500s, you have the Mughals invading India in a very brutal and violent invasion, forcible conversions, heavy taxes on people and tolls. It was a very difficult time. It is during this time that the gurus came into the picture, the Sikh gurus. So you have the Sikh gurus reforming society. We're talking about social, economical, religious, political reforms for a couple hundred years. And then after the gurus, in the post-guru period, we have a Sikh kingdom established, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, about 50 years worth of Sikh rule. And then you have the British sneaking into the picture, kind of taking over and putting their infrastructure in place, which is pretty key to how some of the Sikh issues came about. And they were there until Indian independence in 1947, and since then the Indian government has been its own entity. So what I would call the first major factor in the things that led up to 84, or the struggle, or what the Sikh issues were, began with the idea of what the Sikh identity was. And I'm talking about like the Sikh identity as an individual, as an entire group, as the Panth, being separate from Hindus, having our own distinct beliefs, politics, language, history, traditions, and the frustrations of how much effort that actually took. So in the late 1800s, you have the Singh Sabha movement. Now, the Singh Sabha movement is particularly interesting because a lot of times it's described as like a response to the Arya Samaji movement, but it really came out of the Arya Samaji movement. Gyani Dit Singh and another Gursikh of the time, they were part of Arya Samaji. And Arya Samaji was basically started by a man named, he was a Rishi Dayanand Saraswati, and it was a Hindu reform movement designed to reject like Murti Puja and some of the common practices and replace it with understanding of the Vedas as the ultimate truth. And they meditated on mantras as a central theme of the movement, along with recognizing Om as the true and highest ultimate name for God. And Swami Dayanand was very logical and scientific, and he had a very critical analysis of other faiths, especially Christianity and Islam. And in that, he also took on other Indian religions like Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. So the Arya Samaji movement was like India is for Indians, and it was a rejection of kind of like the whole British way of doing things and kind of establishing a true Hindu. Well, Gyani Dit Singh and Javara Singh, they were like members of the Arya Samaji movement because they also felt like, we don't need the British, or we don't need somebody else telling us how to do things. Well, it turned out the Arya Samajis also attacked Sikhism, and they started speaking bad about the gurus. Therefore, Gyani Dit Singh broke away and really became one of the key people in the Singh Sabha movement, which started to create its own identity. So the key players for the Singh Sabha movement were Professor Gurmukh Singh. He was 24 when he started with this movement, and he actually died at 49 years old from a heart attack. So fairly young guy, and was actively involved in creating this movement for half of his life, which wasn't very long. Gyani Dit Singh, he also died young at like 51, like that picture there, I guess, with the big white dotty. He wasn't that old. And he was also young, in his 20s or so, when he started with the Singh Sabha movement. Khan Singh Nabha is famous for the Hum Hindu Nahi book and the Mahankosh. Mahan Kosh, and he basically wrote this response to the Arya Samaji movement of saying everybody is a Hindu. We are Hindus and we speak Hindi. He wrote this Hum Hindu Nahi to say no, we Sikhs have our own identity. And what's interesting is, although there was like a couple of like these Singh Sabha organizations, they eventually kind of consolidated around the movement started by these three people, and they were able to, establish the Raat Merda. They created the SGPC. They took the Gurdwaras back from the Mahants. There was a Gurdwara reform. They established the Anand Karaj. Their focus was Punjabi as a language, and they kept Sikh separate from Hindu. Also, out of Singh Sabha movement came the Akali Dal Party, which was a political party specifically designed for Sikh sentiments, Sikh philosophies, and Sikh ideas that could be applied equally and beneficial for everyone. Finally, Sikh Sabha movement is responsible for publishing and distributing a lot of Sikh information, especially through the Sikh Missionary College. This was very, very important because there was a concerted effort to define people as Hindu, and the Singh Sabha movement was trying to come up with a clear definition of what a Sikh is and what Sikh rights are and what Sikh education is, etc., etc. Standardization of Maryada and the way the Gurdwaras are run. This also centralized how the money was collected so that they could continue to fund these efforts. The second major factor revolves more around the politics, politicians, broken promises, etc. This is a time when the British are in control, but they're kind of in a difficult situation. You have the world wars happening. British resources have been depleted. It's a taxing toll on British citizens. And support at home in Britain is declining for some of the reach that Britain had obtained, the United Kingdom had obtained. They'd gone out to Africa, India, etc. And so there was an idea that Britons themselves wanted things to come back because they felt a little bit too stretched out. So as their grip is weakening worldwide, they start to look for ways out of everywhere, including India. And the British kind of set things up with India to say, okay, there'll be this Muslim state, which we'll call Pakistan. There'll be this Hindu state called India. And they offered the Sikhs your own state. And the Sikhs were kind of torn. They were being warned by Jinnah, who was in Pakistan, the leader of Pakistan, saying, hey, you're going to be a slave to the Hindus if you don't take your own state. Now, he had a political agenda for saying that because he wanted to keep a buffer zone between Pakistan and the rest of India. On the other hand, the Indians were saying, Jawaharlal Nehru and Mohandas Gandhi, they had this idea that they wanted to create a cohesive, unified, border-designed India and consolidate everything under one identity, and they did not want the Sikhs to have their separate state. They did not want necessarily Muslims to have their separate state either. They just wanted them out of India. So in all of this, and I'm not going to go into great detail about all the broken promises and stuff. We've heard a lot of those quotes. You'll probably hear some at the retreat. But in all of this, basically the Sikhs got screwed. They had a lot of regrets. Master Tara Singh, who was involved in the negotiations, he felt kind of betrayed and tricked, and later on really regretted how things had played out. But there was a lot of Sikh contributions to that independence, and we felt like we didn't get recognized when it came time to build the Constitution and establish who the citizens of India were. The map kind of just showing India a little bit, like some of the borders. You can see Pakistan over here, Punjab over here, and then Bangladesh over here, which we had East and West Pakistan, and that comes into play a little bit later. One of the problems with all of this was a mass migration when Pakistan was split out. It's a very bloody and deadly migration, one of the worst in human history. A very difficult migration, people having to leave their land, their homes, watch other people move into it. It's created a lot of resentment and hatred, and you had just, a logistical nightmare with millions of people moving from one country to the other by any means they could get across. Some pictures just showing how bad it was. So the results of the partition are you have clashes between Muslims and the Sikhs and the Hindus. You also end up with no Sikh state, which was a bad deal. And as a matter of fact, the Pittsburgh Press in 1947, they even ran an article saying how Sikhistan, which was the term they used, Sikhistan, was not granted to the Sikhs. The Sikhs did not get their own state. So this was kind of world news, and the idea of the Sikh separate state kind of came into play at this time, and the term Sikhistan seems to come around the 1940s. And there's a lot of bitterness against Muslims in Pakistan, and this leads to an increasing feeling of nationalism, which also causes some tension because the national identity was Hindu and Indian, and the Sikhs had been struggling for a while to establish themselves and their own identity. So the third major factor, I would say, in the events that led up to 1984 were the issues on Sikh rights. You had a lot of sacrifices by the Sikhs. We were a major part of the army. We were the major people affected during the migration from Pakistan to India. And so there was a lot of sacrifices made by the Sikhs for India. The work ethic in the Sikhs, they were farmers and business, establishing trade. They were such hard workers. They were doing so much for the economy, and they kind of weren't getting their fair treatment that they deserved, especially when it came to what some of the standards for trade and access to water, how that was concerned. This is a time where we're talking about the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was a worldwide phenomenon, but particularly for Punjab, it was a time of being able to produce high-yielding varieties of wheat. And actually, these were engineered seeds by companies like Monsanto, who have been in the news more recently too for their control over the genetic components of corn seeds. They at that time were also controlling wheat seeds in India, and actually they had basically worked with the government to say, this is the law. You will have to use these high-yielding seeds so that we can produce more wheat and we can feed more people. They also dictated what kind of chemicals you had to use. They owned the chemical companies for all the pesticides. Not only that, they were working with the banks on making sure that farmers who were poor and didn't have money could get loans from the banks in order to buy the seeds and the chemicals. So you have these companies on top making all this profit while the guy at the bottom is working hard, getting loans, going into debt, and ended up using these seeds, which took a lot more water to produce the wheat because so much wheat was being produced, and it took other crops out of rotation. And when they did that, when they took out other crops out of the rotation, it basically destroyed the land. It made it useless for other things. Not only that, you had a lot of pesticides being used, and you have the soil becoming very toxic. This is also a time where you have a lot of issues around the riparian rights, the river rights, the water rights to irrigation. So there's a lot of contesting going on in the courts. There's something called the Reorganization Act of 1966, where they try to figure out where the water is going to go, and the government decides that they can send more white water to Haryana out of Punjab, and Punjab's getting less of the water, even though it's producing all this wheat. And they're being told to control their wheat prices by the government. When the government buys the wheat from the Punjabi farmer, they're holding the prices and they're selling it for the profit to the government to other parts of India. So in the meantime, you have all these issues coming up, political battles for the water rights, you have court battles, you have costs associated with the loans, and you have the profits being sucked by the government and not the people who are doing the work. Later on, actually, in 1981, Indira Gandhi actually brokers a deal between the different states, Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan, to kind of get them all to agree on how the water is going to be used. And at that time, the chief minister of Punjab, his name was Darbar Singh, he basically resigned after president's rule, which we're going to talk about later, came into effect, because he says he was forced to sign this agreement. He took a lot of crap for it. I mean, people were not happy with the way this all played out for Punjabi farmers. Some of the other factors in history that kind of shaped the events of 1984 were these new jathas, that started. The Akhand Kirtan Jatha started by Ranthir Singh. It was a style of doing prachar through kirtan and living in a certain discipline, believed to be the true actual Maryada followed by Guru Gobind Singh. And this gained a lot of popularity, and a lot of the people involved in the 70s and 80s in the events that happened were members of Akhand Kirtan Jatha. You also have Sant Gyani Gurbachan Singh and Sant Kartar Singh of Damdami Taksal. These personalities are pretty much the more modern known personalities, established the identity of what we would call the modern day Damdami Taksal. And Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was the successor to Sant Kartar Singh. So kind of wanted to mention that in the early 1900s and mid 1900s, you kind of have a lot of grassroots movement happening where people from the villages or poorer areas, they're identifying with these jathas that are coming through and doing various types of prachar, and they're gaining momentum. And there's a lot of talk about politics as well as social issues, that equality and being treated as the same as the other citizens of India. At this point, I just want to kind of mention the Anandpur Sahib resolution. It comes together in 1973, even though there had been some workings on it by the Akali Dal a little bit earlier. It becomes an official document, Anandpur Sahib resolution in 1973. Indira Gandhi at that time saw this as a separatist document. She didn't like it too much. But what I found interesting was that there were a lot of things about the Anandpur Sahib resolution that we don't really hear much of. And it's interesting to see how the Akali Dal, which was the Sikh political body in Punjab, how they were trying to work on Punjab, the society, and some of the issues that were going on. For example, the basic demands, like some of the things they talked about, just the water rights, making sure that the water is done fairly. One of the issues in the Anandpur Sahib resolution was permits for sugar mills. Apparently permits were being given all around India and new mills were popping up, and Punjab was being limited on the number of permits it could have. Even though it was the major sugarcane producer, it was being limited in an effort to bring that economy to other parts of India. Well, this made the sugarcane farmers and the people in Punjab suffer. They also were asking for easing up on a lot of the taxes used for the machinery in farming. Again, Punjab was kind of singled out. More taxes were put on certain types of farm machinery that made it more difficult, more expensive for the Punjabi farmer to produce goods compared to other people in India. One of the other issues that we don't talk about much is in the Anandpur Sahib resolution, they talk about the women's right to inherit property, because India had certain rules about how women could inherit property in the case of a death. But the main things here are how the water rights work, how the government treats the farmers and in their commerce and their trade, and also recognizing like the Sikh marriage as an official marriage in India. All right, so now if we take it from like the 1960s up to June of 1984, I think we can kind of jump off the timeline and get to like the key players and kind of show how everything went down with each one of these players. There's only a couple of people. There's like these 6 or 7 people that you really need to know. There's really a lot of people we should know, but if you know these people, you kind of really know how things played out. All right, so just kind of going left to right here, that's Gurbachan Singh Nirankari, commonly referred to as Gurbachana by Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. Over here, Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. He was the head of the Nirankaris. Claimed himself to be he was claimed to be the guru of the Nirankaris, and he was very vocal and very disrespectful towards traditional Sikh tenets, and especially Guru Granth Sahib, often treating it very disrespectfully, calling it a book, putting his feet on top of it, those kinds of things. This here is Gurcharan Singh Tora. He was the president of SGPC, which was like the, I guess you could call it the operational arm of what came out of Singh Sabha. It ran all the gurdwaras. So he was the one deciding what information is published, or he was the president of the group. The SGPC decided what information gets published, how the gurdwaras will be run, how the money is collected, etc., etc. This here is Prakash Singh Badal. He was the chief minister of Punjab, and actually he was chief minister for like a long time on and off. And then he still is today. And his son, Sukhbir Singh Badal, is now the president of the SGPC. I already talked about Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. This is Lala Jagat Narayan. We're going to talk about him a little bit. This is Sant Harchand Singh Langowal. He was the president of Akali Dal. Akali Dal is the Sikh political party. And Indira Gandhi, the infamous Prime Minister of India. All right, so a little bit about Indira Gandhi. She was the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru was the first Prime Minister of India. She was given cabinet positions in his government. She understood exactly what he was trying to accomplish. She knew exactly what to do. She gained a lot of experience early on, being around all the politicians and knowing exactly how things run. In 1966, she herself was sworn in as the third Prime Minister of India. And in 1969, she leads with support from the Socialist and the Communist Congress. She had these programs that was for helping poor people. So she was definitely on the side of the Socialists and the Communists in India, because they were all about social programs. But a lot of people doubted that. There's a famous program she had called Garibi Hatao, which was to end poverty. Well, there was cartoons famously drawn of Garib Hatao, where poor people felt like she was actually stopping them. So even though those were her platforms, she didn't always have the faith of the people. Her goal, though, was very clear. She wanted to create a India that had one identity and was under one control, her control. And one of her first steps that she did, this was actually in 1969, July of 1969, they announced that top 14 banks of India have been nationalized. So basically the government takes control of the banks and makes them into national banks. And this kind of tactic was used throughout her being prime minister. She nationalized lots of services in order to accomplish this goal of creating one cohesive India. Her goal, like I said, is to centralize the rule. And she also did things like use the war for East Pakistan. So we have a West Pakistan and East Pakistan. She used this, keeping this war of East and West Pakistan as a way to have a common enemy for India. And that helped solidify the idea of India's identity, and then therefore centralized her rule. She also did things like deregulating business in a way that benefited very rich and powerful people that she knew. And then a lot of other people suffered. The other thing that she did that was weird, while she's deregulating business around India and giving opportunities to some of these really rich people to kind of come into other parts of India and make money, she started regulating Punjab, putting more and more restrictions on Punjab so that she could kind of balance out the output Punjab had. Punjab was putting out a lot of the food and grain and sugar and things like that was resources that were being used around India. So as an example of one of the tactics Indira Gandhi used, she was accused of malpractice, electoral malpractice. Some groups were saying that she rigged the vote, she threatened people, she actually maybe have even murdered people in order to make sure that she was elected. Now, the charges were being brought up, she was going to be charged, and just the charge alone of murder would have impeached her or whatever from her seat as prime minister. So before any of that can happen, she declares a state of emergency, which gives her like ultimate power. It gives her like imperial rule now over India, because it's a state of emergency. She says there's a threat, an internal disturbance that could cause the safety of India to come into question. Now, the thing is, she thought of herself as being extremely popular. She thought people loved her because people were with her when she got elected in the 60s. But she didn't realize that a lot of people felt like there was broken promises. People were questioning this whole idea of nationalizing India. And then especially when she declared the state of emergency and she had these allegations against her, people were very suspicious. Now, one note here is that the Akali Dal, the Sikh political party, was very, very strongly protesting her. Okay, they did not let up. They're the ones that pushed forward with the whole idea that she had murdered a cabinet member or whatever in order to keep her power. And they never let up, while other people kind of dropped off and, whatever. Akali Dal persisted with this claim. While she saw herself as popular, so in I guess it was 1977, I don't know, when they did the election, she lost. She actually lost, and she's pissed because she loses and she actually gets arrested. So in like 77, she's arrested for plotting this murder against her opposition. And, and basically she's upset. Now, she had people that on her side, there was a hijacking of an airplane and they said, let her out of jail, or, we're not going to let this plane down or whatever. And the people that had hijacked that airplane later on, when Indira Gandhi came back into power, they got cabinet positions. They got high positions in the government. But anyway, so she's in jail, she's arrested, and it ends up being like they dropped the charges or whatever. They couldn't really prove that she murdered anybody, and she gets out of jail. And in a weird way now, people are feeling sorry for her in general. People in India are kind of with her now. They feel like she got the short end of the stick, that she got treated poorly or whatever. So now she's kind of gained people's favor back, and she wins the election. She comes back and wins. I don't know what year it was, 1980 or whatever it was. Okay, so one of the tactics she used, so she declares president's rule and claims that there's these terrorist organizations in India, and India needs this president's rule, which gave authority to the state chief ministers and the police to run with military power, with absolute control. They had complete control over their areas. And then you had groups like the Tamil Tigers and the issue in Kashmir, and Sikh groups that, well, the Sikh groups weren't really Sikh groups at this time so much. I just kind of put them up there to make the point. But what you have is you have these groups that can have this separate idea, and she's trying to consolidate India, and she's able to kind of get people in the masses to go against these groups. As an example, for Sikhs, anytime a crime was committed by a Sikh, they printed the Sikh's name. So like, Rajinder Singh stole money from this Hindu shopkeeper. But when it was the other way around, it was just generic. A Hindu stole money from a Sikh shopkeeper. And what happened is the generic news kind of didn't register with people as much as specific names did, because it made it sound like the Sikh was attacking a Hindu just because the Sikh was attacking a Hindu. It was not just a criminal committing a crime. And those kinds of little tactics in media and those kinds of things actually created this whole tension against Sikhs in the masses. Okay, Prakash Singh Badal. He was the Chief Minister of Punjab, 1970, 71, 77 to 80, 97 to 2002, and 2007 to present. He was not Prime Minister of Punjab, he was not the Chief Minister of Punjab after 1980 because Indira Gandhi had declared president's rule and basically made his position null and void, because the government now dictated how the state would be run. So he's pretty much useless at that point. He was the Shiromani Akali Dal president from 95 to 2008. So when he was not really, there's some overlap, but while he had kind of like this hiatus from being chief minister of Punjab, he was the president of the Akali Dal, the Sikh political party. There's also chance that he may have been the one that cleared the way for the attack, kind of letting it happen and making sure key players got out. Gurcharan Singh Tora was the president of SGPC for 27 years. I mean, and these guys knew the system and how it worked. He oversaw all the gurdwaras in Akal Takht. He kind of favored Bhindranwale, but he was a very tough, hard-headed person. And he was really mostly concerned with Sikh affairs. He wasn't so concerned with all the political stuff, of all of Punjab or all of India. He was more concentrated on Sikh issues. But, him and Prakash Singh Badal, there was times when they were like great friends and buddies, and there was times when they were kind of against each other. But in a way, SGPC stayed separated from Punjab politics. And, they kind of had their own identity, which isn't the case so much today. During the attack in 84, he was actually arrested and removed from Darbar Sahib, which is an interesting move. Tora, Langowal, who we're going to talk about, a couple of these people, they were actually, the attack happened, they were there, they were arrested and taken out of there, and then we know what happens after that. Actually, we're going to get into that in some of the other workshops. Harchand Singh Langowal was the president of Akali Dal at the time. He was involved in many of the early protests, especially against Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi kind of had it out for the Sikh political party. She did not. This is one of the reasons why she had it out for Sikhs in general. She just saw them as annoying. She saw them as a thorn in her side. She didn't like the fact that they had some momentum. But he was often referred to as a Sant because he was very knowledgeable on Sikhism, and it actually was part of the tradition of the Akali Dal. They hired the president was usually somebody chosen that was knowledgeable, had a lot of knowledge on Gurbani, and maybe did kirtan and katha and could explain Sikhism to a lot of people. This was the kind of people that they were putting into power, but they all had their own shortcomings. Okay, so even though he was considered like a moderate voice in the whole agitation, Indira Gandhi used that kind of to her advantage, because then she could kind of go to him and kind of get things through to the other side. Like if she needed a message sent to Bhindranwale or something, or get a feeler for things, she could kind of use him as a pawn, and he didn't even realize it. What's interesting though is that he announced that the Akali Dal was going to start the civil disobedience, and Amritsar, Punjab, they're going to stop paying land revenues, water bills, electric bills. They're going to stop blocking the flow. They're going to start to block the flow of grain out of Punjab until Sikh demands are met, which was the Anand Prasad resolution. Basically, the next day is the attack on Darbar Sahib. So, is it in a response to the disobedience, or was the whole announcement of this whole thing that the Akali Dal was going to do for the Sikhs kind of a ploy or a distraction? It's hard to tell. And everybody's got their opinion. And like I said earlier, he was arrested and removed from the Darbar Sahib complex during the attack, along with Tora, from the president of the SGPC. All right, Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, there is already a workshop dedicated to much more about him, so I really don't want to get too much into him, but just to know that he was the key player that he was. He was a young, charismatic leader from Damdami Taksal, took the position in 1977. He's a simple farmer, left his farm, left his family. His thinking was much more in line with Congress, and actually early on, there's pictures of him with Indira Gandhi because he favored Congress's position on a lot of the social issues. And at the time, a lot of the Sikh Panth and the Sikh masses saw the Akali Dal as a big joke. These were guys that couldn't really get anything done, but they were out there protesting and always in front of everybody. So he leaves to head the Damdami Taksal. The 1978 Vaisakhi Incident was basically the Niranकारी Guru had a big function that they put on Vaisakhi, kind of taunting, the more traditional Sikh Vaisakhi celebrations. They put on their own celebration where there was disrespect of Guru Granth Sahib. Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale heard about that they were disrespecting Guru Granth Sahib and that he was making fun of Panch Pyare, etc., etc. So they started to organize a protest against that program. They did ardas. People in masses went from Akal Takht to the Nirankari camp, and when they got there, they were fired upon. There was police involved, and we have these 13 people who were shaheed during that Vaisakhi incident. including Bhai Fauja Singh, who pretty much was leading the way in that protest. They were there for a peaceful protest. The Sikhs were not armed. I mean, they had their kirpans, but they weren't armed. They were fired upon, and it seemed like the people there were waiting for everybody to show up. This is one of the jump-off points where it became pretty obvious that the Sikhs weren't going to get the same kinds of protections that other anti-Sikh type groups were getting, and that things are tense, and there's some volatility in the air, and so you start to see that all kind of starting to happen right around 1978. Bhindranwale really wasn't happy about the fact that 13 people were killed. Nobody was really punished for it. The police kind of said they couldn't figure out who did it, who was actually shooting. And so in 1981, when Nirgari Gurbachan is killed, Bhindranwale is openly celebrating. He's happy. He's glad this guy's gone because he was insulting the Gurus. He was insulting Guru Granth Sahib. He was insulting Sikhs. He was taunting them. And so he's glad. He's openly glad. And what happens is people start to suspect that he was involved in the death, but he was never charged. Okay. Lala Jagat Narayan. He was an Arya Samaji who had very anti-Sikh demands. He wrote against the Anandpur Sahib resolution and against a Punjabi-speaking state. And he was one of the speakers at that 78 Nirangari event. So this was another thing that was agitating him. The other thing is he wrote a lot against Bhindranwale. But he hated Bhindranwale. Bhindranwale hated him too. And so this was another thorn in his side. Somebody that's writing these articles, they're writing against Sikh sentiments, and he's writing against Bhindranwale. He ends up getting killed. Okay? When he dies, people suspect that Bhindranwale killed him. So Bhindranwale turns himself in. In 1981, he turns himself in and says, okay, if you think I killed him, you have some evidence, here I am, charge me. They released him after 25 days. It is a little sticky. There was a hijacking involved, and those guys actually got killed and tortured and beaten. And there is a famous quote that he has where he's like, yeah, when the daughter of a Brahmin has people hijack an airplane, they get cabinet positions. When someone does it in the name of religion, they get tortured and killed. So this adds to the feeling that the government does whatever it wants to suit itself. But when it comes to the normal average people that do things for reasons that are right or just or for religion, they get punished. So there's a lot of tension now building over him being arrested. There's no evidence. And they basically let him go. Bhindranwale then says, you know what? Forget this Congress thing. Akali Dal leaders come to him. They talk to him. They convince him to join them to getting Anandpur Sahib resolution passed. And they start what is called a Dharam Yudh Morcha. So they're basically trying to say, we're going to work together. So now you have this grassroots movement with Bhindranwale and the Sikh political party coming together and saying, we're going to work together. They also get the support of SGPC. So Akali Dal invites him to stay at Darbar Sahib in 1982. Tora approves that Bhindranwale can stay there. He's in charge of SGPC. He runs the complex. It's his say. And then Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale moves into Akal Takht in December of 1983. It's also around this time that he learns of this looming attack on Akal Takht. He actually hears that they're practicing this attack on Akal Takht, and there's little murmurings going on. So he says, fine, you don't have to attack Akal Takht. I'll turn myself in. So apparently 6 months before the attack, he turns himself in and he's told to go home. They have no warrant for him and they tell him to go home. So we're not going to really get into much more here. I've already spent almost 40 minutes. I was trying to cut this down as much as I could. I'm trying to talk fast, but here are a couple of books that I think, if nothing else, there's one more on the next slide, but Struggle for Justice is all the speeches in conversation with Bhindranwale that were in Punjabi. They've been translated into English by Dr. Ranbir Singh Sandhu. Excellent book, kind of gives you insight on how he thought and what he actually said, which you're going to learn a lot about that in one of the workshops. The Sikhs of Punjab by Joyce Pettigrew, very good book, kind of gives you an anthropological view of the struggle and how it went down. Reduced to Ashes, there's a whole workshop on this by Rubenpal Singh. This is Ram Narayan Kumar. He's got a couple of books that are worth reading. One is the Sikh unrest in the Indian state, which goes into a lot more detail about a lot of those politics and the players that I talked about. The Report to the Nation, Oppression in Punjab, Citizens for Democracy. Very good book. Eyewitness accounts of torture. Very hard to read. India Commits Suicide. G.S. Dillon's book about India's political maneuvering and how it is responsible for its own problems. The terrorist, quote-unquote, terrorist uprisings and the difficulty India had, and how by attacking Akal Takht and how the Indian army behaved and acted in those days totally ruined India's reputation. It went from one of the most respected armies in the world to one that couldn't be trusted. And then finally, Fighting for Faith in Nation by Dr. Cynthia Mahmood. Excellent book. It's an anthropological study of the Sikh militancy and what was happening, what the environment was like, and some of the eyewitness accounts of how people were tortured, beaten, treated, killed. And okay, I think that pretty much covers it all. So the three major factors that we tried to identify were that Sikh identity during Singh Sabha movement, the definition of a Sikh, the Sikhs being separate from Hindus, the frustrations of trying to propagate that in an environment where everybody was trying to create the cohesive Hindu identity. Then partition, the Sikh state, the fact that we didn't get our own state and how we were played politically and some of the frustrations that came out of that. Then the third major component being some of those social issues and basic rights as business owners and citizens, water rights for the farmers, permits to do business, all that kind of stuff that kind of built up over time and created this environment of oppression, which eventually led to a lot of difficulty and frustration. So when you have a figure like Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale come on the stage and he's telling everybody to stand up for their rights, people were primed for it. People were prepped for it. People were ready for it. And then on top of that, you have Indira Gandhi trying to create this cohesive India under one single rule and using these different small groups that she figured she could just create a common enemy out of and use that as a way to create an Indian identity. So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, that's what the retreat is for, and I look forward to meeting everybody there. Okay, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.